I never thought my own blood would one day call me insane. The moment still echoes in my ears. My sister standing in the family lawyer's office, waving a folder of forged medical records and saying, "She's unstable. She needs professional help before she ruins everything." And just like that, they tried to strip me of my property, my dignity, and even my freedom. That was the day I realized my biggest enemies weren't strangers outside. It was the people I had once shared a home with. My family. The ones I loved the most. And if I didn't fight back, I was about to lose everything I had worked for all my life. My name is Mary Jane, and this is the story of how betrayal almost destroyed me, and how love and justice pulled me through. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia, into a family that looked picture perfect on the outside. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. My parents owned a small grocery store that demanded endless hours of sweat, but it kept food on our table. I was the eldest of three, me, my sister Michelle, and my younger brother Daniel. From as early as I can remember, responsibility sat on my shoulders like a second skin. When my parents were at the store, I was the one cooking meals, helping Michelle with homework, keeping Daniel from getting into trouble. And I never complained because family was everything to me. As we grew older, life changed. I worked hard in school, earned scholarships, and eventually built a career in real estate. I was proud when I bought my first property at just 27, a modest duplex in a quiet neighborhood. That was the start of something bigger. Over the years, I carefully saved, invested, and grew a portfolio of rental properties. Nothing flashy, but enough to guarantee me financial security. I thought my success would make my family proud. Instead, it slowly poisoned them. At first, it was subtle. The jokes about me acting like a boss, the backhanded compliments about my lifestyle. Then it shifted to requests. Michelle wanted me to co-sign a loan for her failing boutique. Daniel begged me to lend him thousands to clear gambling debts. I helped when I could, but when I started saying no, that's when the love turned to resentment. The real nightmare began when my father passed away. His death broke me. I had adored that man. But it also left behind a house, some land, and unresolved paperwork. Suddenly, every conversation with my siblings circled back to property, money, and control. One evening, I came home to find Michelle sitting on my porch. She had this sweet smile plastered on her face, holding a casserole dish like she'd suddenly remembered how to be my sister. "Mary Jane," she said, "we just need to talk. It's about Dad's house. Maybe we can agree to put it in my name since you already have plenty." I froze. I had spent weeks handling probate, paying taxes, maintaining the place while grieving. And here she was, casually asking me to sign it away. When I refused, things escalated quickly. First, whispers spread among extended family, claims that I was greedy and controlling. Then came the late-night phone calls from Daniel, slurring that I was trying to rob them blind. But nothing could have prepared me for the nuclear weapon they were about to unleash. A few weeks later, I was summoned to a meeting at the lawyer's office. I walked in confident, holding receipts, bank statements, and proof of everything I had done. But the moment I sat down, Michelle slid a folder across the table. Inside were papers claiming I had a history of mental illness, that I had been hospitalized twice, and that I was unfit to manage property. I swear my heart stopped. The lawyer looked at me with cautious eyes, asking if it was true. And my siblings just sat there, nodding like saints doing the Lord's work. The records were fake, I knew that. But the detail was terrifying. Exact dates. Medical jargon. Even fake doctors' signatures. My own family had gone that far to paint me as crazy. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Michelle's voice. "She's unstable. She needs professional help." My hands shook as I realized the truth. They weren't just trying to steal Dad's house. They wanted all of my assets. If they could legally prove I was insane, they could petition to take over my estate. Everything I had worked for could vanish overnight. I cried until dawn. But when the sun came up, something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to let them bury me alive under lies. I was going to fight back. The first step was digging. I needed proof of the forgery, and I needed it fast. I started with the medical facilities listed in their so-called records. I drove for hours showing the documents to administrators who shook their heads and said, "We have no record of you ever being admitted." I recorded every conversation. Took photos of every letter confirming my clean history. With each piece of evidence I felt my strength returning. But the deeper I dug, the darker it got. A hospital clerk quietly hinted that someone, likely Michelle, had tried to bribe her into creating a false entry in their system. Another contact told me Daniel had been snooping around my rental properties, asking tenants questions about my behavior. That's when I knew it wasn't just paperwork. They were building a case step by step to convince the court and the community that I was unfit. And the scariest part? Some people were starting to believe it. I'll never forget the day my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, stopped me while I was taking out the trash. She tilted her head and whispered, "Are you okay, honey? I heard you've been having some episodes." I wanted to scream. Instead, I just nodded politely, went back inside and locked the door. The smear campaign was working. At that point, love and betrayal were tangled so tightly I could barely breathe. These were the people who once laughed with me over birthday cakes, who leaned on me during hard times. Now they were the ones plotting my downfall. But if they thought I'd fold, they didn't know me well enough. I made up my mind. I was going to fight them legally, socially, and emotionally. I was going to protect what was mine no matter how dirty they played. What I didn't realize yet was that in the process of defending myself, I was about to uncover secrets in my family that went far deeper than property. Secrets that would shatter everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and justice. And the first clue was about to arrive in my mailbox. The envelope was ordinary, just a plain white envelope with my name scribbled across it. But sometimes the most ordinary things carry the deadliest weight. It was early morning and the world outside was still half asleep. The sun hadn't fully climbed, the street was quiet, and the sound of birds was the only sign of life. I walked out in my robe, opened my mailbox, and there it was. No return address. No stamp. Just hand-delivered sometime during the night. My stomach knotted. I took it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and stared at it as though it might explode. For a long time I didn't touch it. I just sat there sipping bitter coffee, trying to convince myself that it was probably nothing. But deep down I already knew, this was part of their game. Finally, with trembling fingers, I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, no handwriting. The message was short and cruel. Unstable people don't deserve property. Step down before it's too late. No signature. No direct threat. But the meaning was crystal clear. They were warning me or mocking me. I gripped the paper so hard my knuckles turned white. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I had always thought betrayal hurt most when it was spoken aloud face to face. But seeing it written, anonymous and deliberate, it cut deeper. I folded the letter carefully and slid it into a plastic sleeve. Evidence. That's how I had to think now. Everything was evidence. Every word, every action, every whisper. If they wanted a war, I was going to document every battle. The next few weeks became a blur of two realities. On the surface, I lived my usual life. Meeting tenants, paying bills, pretending to smile at neighbors. But underneath, I was a detective in my own family, piecing together lies and motives. I started with Michelle. My sister had always been charming, the kind of woman people described as put together. But I knew her cracks. She'd been struggling for years. Failed businesses, failed relationships, debts she tried to hide. To the world she was polished. To me she was desperate. I began noticing her car parked near my properties, too often to be coincidence. Once I caught her talking to one of my tenants, a young single mother who later avoided eye contact whenever I asked about the conversation. Another time I saw her in the courthouse lobby, whispering with a clerk I vaguely recognized from probate. Michelle wasn't working alone. Daniel, my younger brother, was less subtle. His life had spiraled into addiction and gambling, and I had bailed him out more times than I could count. He was the kind who wore resentment on his sleeve, Every glance felt like an accusation that I had made it, while he stumbled. He didn't bother hiding his bitterness anymore. One night I got a call from an unknown number. When I picked up, the voice on the other end was slurred, unmistakably Daniel. "You think you're smart, Mary Jane. But soon everyone's gonna see the real you. Crazy doesn't keep houses. Crazy doesn't keep money. Crazy ends up with nothing." Then he hung up. I sat there in the dark, phone pressed against my chest, and the weight of his words sank in. They weren't just trying to take my father's property anymore. They wanted it all. My entire portfolio, my financial independence, my reputation. And if they could convince the world that I was unstable, they could legally strip me of everything. That realization lit a fire inside me. I wasn't just protecting bricks and land, I was protecting my sanity, my identity, and the years of sweat it had taken to build my life. So I fought back the only way I knew how, by gathering more evidence. I installed cameras outside my home, recording every movement around my property. I hired a private investigator, something I never thought I'd do in my life. His name was Mark, a retired cop with tired eyes and a quiet confidence. At first I was hesitant to involve him. Talking to a stranger about family betrayal felt like peeling open wounds I wanted to keep hidden. But when I handed him the anonymous letter, he nodded and said, "This isn't just family drama anymore. This is calculated. You need to protect yourself." Mark began tailing Michelle and Daniel, and what he uncovered left me both furious and terrified. Michelle had been visiting a psychiatrist's office, not for herself, but to inquire about how mental health records could be subpoenaed in property disputes. She wasn't sick, she was preparing ammunition. Meanwhile, Daniel had been frequenting a shady law office downtown, the kind where lawsuits are manufactured like assembly lines. Then came the bombshell. One of Michelle's close friends worked in the county clerk's office, with access to sealed documents. Suddenly, it all made sense. How they had forged medical records so convincingly, how they had insider details that made the lies believable. I felt my blood run cold. This wasn't sibling rivalry. This was a conspiracy. The deeper I looked, the more I saw their fingerprints everywhere. Whisper campaigns among neighbors. Strange letters left at my tenants' doors, warning them that their landlady is unstable and might lose the property soon. Even my own bank flagged one of my accounts for unusual activity, after someone tried to access it using personal information only a family member would know. It was suffocating. Every day I woke up wondering which part of my life would collapse next. And yet, in the middle of all this chaos, something unexpected happened. Something that kept me from completely drowning. Love found me. His name was David, a contractor I had worked with on a renovation project months before. Tall, steady, with hands that looked like they had built the world from scratch. He called one evening to check on a payment detail, but when he heard the strain in my voice, he asked if I was okay. And for the first time in weeks, I told someone the truth. He listened without judgment, without interruption. When I finally paused, bracing for disbelief, he said simply, "Mary Jane, you're not crazy. They are. And you don't have to go through this alone." Something in me cracked open. I didn't even realize how starved I was for kindness until his words wrapped around me like a blanket. From that day, David became my anchor, showing up at court hearings, walking me to my car at night, reminding me that I wasn't fighting this war in the dark. But love, as comforting as it was, didn't shield me from the next escalation. One morning I woke to banging on my front door. When I opened it, 2 police officers stood on my porch. My heart slammed against my ribs. "Ma'am," one officer said, "we received a wellness check request. Someone reported erratic behavior at this address." My blood froze. They stepped inside, scanning the room, asking if I had been hearing voices or acting aggressively. I could barely form words, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped my coffee mug. This was it. Michelle and Daniel had moved from whispers to official reports. They wanted a paper trail. They wanted me dragged into the system, labeled unstable. I kept calm, answered politely, and even offered them coffee. By the time they left, they looked embarrassed, almost apologetic. But the damage was done. Somewhere in the police database, there was now a note linking my name to a wellness check. That night, I sat with David on the porch, my face buried in my hands. "They're going to destroy me," I whispered. "No matter what I do, they're 2 steps ahead." He tilted my chin up. His eyes were steady. "Then you take bigger steps. We'll find a way to turn this back on them." That's when the idea hit me. If they were willing to use the law against me, I would use the law against them. But I needed one piece of undeniable proof. Something that would not only clear my name but expose their betrayal in a way no one could deny. The twist, when it came, didn't arrive through lawyers or investigators. It came through a woman named Linda, a nurse who used to work with my father before he passed. She showed up at my doorstep one afternoon, clutching a folder. "I've been hearing things," she said nervously, "about how your family is treating you." I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Inside the folder were documents, real documents, that linked Michelle to an attempt to bribe a medical professional into falsifying psychiatric evaluations. I stared at them, my hands trembling. This was it. The smoking gun. But what Linda said next nearly knocked me off my feet. "Mary Jane, this wasn't just Michelle. Your mother was involved too." I thought betrayal had already drained me dry. But when Linda said my mother was part of it, I felt the floor vanish beneath me. My mother, Caroline. The woman who taught me how to braid my hair, who stayed up late with me before exams, who swore she'd never pick sides between her children. I clung to the belief that at least she was neutral, if not quietly supportive. To hear that she had dipped her hands into this scheme, it was a wound I wasn't prepared for. "Linda, are you sure?" My voice cracked. Linda nodded gravely. "Your mother approached me once years ago asking about how mental evaluations work. Back then I thought it was just curiosity. But when Michelle came to me more recently offering money, your mother was there. She said it was for the good of the family." I pressed my hands against the table to keep from collapsing. For the good of the family. That phrase was poison. It meant they had convinced themselves that stripping me of everything I'd built was somehow noble. I thanked Linda, hugged her tightly, and promised her anonymity. But once she left, I sat in silence, staring at the walls of my kitchen. Every photograph, family reunions, birthdays, holidays, looked different now. Behind every smile, there were shadows I hadn't seen. That night, David found me sitting on the porch, rocking back and forth. He sat beside me without speaking, just letting me lean against his shoulder. Finally, I whispered, "Even my mother." "David, what do I do when even she's against me?" He kissed my temple softly. "You fight harder. You don't let their betrayal define your truth. Blood doesn't always mean loyalty." Those words carried me through the weeks that followed. But the storm only intensified. Michelle and Daniel escalated their smear campaign, and this time they weren't hiding behind whispers. They filed a petition in court, demanding guardianship over my estate. Their claim? That I was mentally unfit to manage my assets. When the papers arrived, I stood frozen in my doorway, the official seal glaring back at me like a cruel joke. Guardianship. As if I were a child. As if I needed my siblings to protect me from myself. My lawyer, a sharp-witted woman named Karen, spread the documents across her desk. "They've pulled every dirty trick in the book," she muttered. "Forged records, staged reports, character witnesses lined up. They're going for full control." I clenched my fist. "They won't win. I have Linda's testimony. I have evidence of forgery. I have..." Karen cut me off gently. "You have truth, Mary Jane. But truth doesn't always win in court. We need strategy. We need to be smarter than them." So began the longest battle of my life. Every day I woke up preparing for war. Depositions, affidavits, meetings with investigators. My life was reduced to files and folders, each one a shield against lies. Karen worked tirelessly, But Michelle and Daniel had resources I hadn't anticipated. They pulled in witnesses, old neighbors, distant relatives, people who hadn't spoken to me in years, suddenly swearing they had seen me lose control or act irrational. One even claimed I had screamed at invisible people in my backyard. I laughed bitterly when I read the statement because on that exact date I was attending a conference in another state. But the absurdity didn't matter. Lies once planted had a way of growing. Meanwhile, the anonymous letters kept coming. Each one sharper, colder. You're not fooling anyone. Step aside before we make you. Crazy people end up in institutions, not houses. Kept them all. Evidence. But some nights when the house was too quiet and the weight too heavy, I would sit in bed with the letters scattered around me, tears blurring the words. How do you fight when the people attacking you know your every weakness? When they know the cracks in your heart better than anyone else? David became my lifeline. He cooked for me when I forgot to eat, held me when nightmares jolted me awake, reminded me of who I really was. Sometimes I felt guilty, dragging him into a mess he didn't create. But he never complained. He only said, "We'll see this through. Together." Then came the day that changed everything. We were in court for a preliminary hearing when Michelle took the stand. She wore a soft pink dress, pearls around her neck, and an expression so serene it almost fooled me. She told the judge, voice trembling, that she only wanted to protect me. That I was not myself since Dad died, that I had become erratic, and that she feared I might lose everything we all worked for. Her crocodile tears fell perfectly on cue. I wanted to scream. Instead, I sat frozen, gripping Karen's arm under the table. Then Daniel testified. He painted me as a tyrant, a sister who hoarded wealth while her family suffered. He spoke of my mood swings, of times I supposedly threatened him, none of which had ever happened. Each lie dripped from his tongue like poison. But it was my mother's turn that broke me. She shuffled to the witness stand, frilier than I remembered, her hands trembling slightly. When the clerk swore her in, she looked at me briefly, just a flicker, and then lowered her eyes. "Mary Jane has always been strong," she said softly. "But lately I've seen changes. Forgetfulness. Bigger. I'm worried about her." Felt like being stabbed by 1,000 knives. My own mother, under oath, reinforcing the narrative that I was unstable. Karen squeezed my hand. "Stay calm," she whispered. "We'll dismantle this." But inside I was shattering. When it was finally my turn to testify, I stood tall even though my knees trembled. I told the judge about my career, my properties, my records of clean health. I presented letters from hospitals confirming no history of treatment. I played recordings of conversations with clerks who admitted Michelle had tried to tamper with files. I even handed over the anonymous letters. Karen's closing argument was fire itself. "Your Honor, this is not a case about guardianship. This is a case about greed. My client built her life from the ground up, and her siblings want to tear it down by fabricating mental illness. If this court allows such deceit, then no independent woman will ever be safe from her own family." The judge didn't rule that day. He scheduled another hearing, giving both sides time to present more evidence. It was a small reprieve, but the war was far from over. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. Yes, somehow the story had leaked. Atlanta woman declared unfit by family. Cameras flashed, microphones shoved in my face, strangers whispering as I walked past. I kept my head high, but inside I was burning. My private pain had become public spectacle. That night, David held me close as I cried into his shirt. "They've turned everyone against me," I sobbed. "Even my mother." He kissed my hair. "Then you turn the truth against them. You still have Linda's documents. You still have the PI's findings. Mary Jane, they think they've cornered you. But they don't know the evidence you're holding back." He was right. I hadn't shown my full hand yet. Linda's folder was still tucked away, untouched in court. And Mark, the PI, had been gathering even more bank transfers, recordings, proof of bribery. We were building to something bigger. And I decided, if they wanted a stage, I would give them one. Not just in court. Not just in whispers. But in front of everyone who had ever doubted me. A public exposure so undeniable that even Michelle's crocodile tears couldn't wash it away. The question was, how much damage would I suffer before that day arrived? Because the next move Michelle made nearly cost me my freedom. One rainy evening as I drove home, red and blue lights flashed behind me. My stomach dropped. I pulled over, rain streaking across my windshield. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am," the officer ordered. Confused, I complied. Minutes later I was in handcuffs. The charge? Trespassing and vandalism, on my own property. Michelle had reported me, claiming she caught me smashing windows at one of the duplexes. She even provided photos. Photos clearly staged but enough to justify my arrest. I sat in the back of the police car, heart pounding as reality sank in. They weren't just attacking my reputation. They were willing to see me behind bars. And if I didn't expose them soon, that's exactly where I'd end up. The police station smelled of damp paper and stale coffee. They took my fingerprints, snapped my mugshot, and led me to a holding cell. I sat on the hard bench, staring at the metal bars, wondering how my life had spiraled to this point. Hours passed, though it felt like days. The cold seeped into my bones, but the real chill came from the thought that Michelle and Daniel were probably celebrating somewhere, laughing over drinks about how far they had dragged me down. Finally, Karen arrived. Her heels clicked against the linoleum floor as she strode toward me, her expression a storm. "This is outrageous," she muttered as the officer unlocked the cell. "I'll have you out of here tonight." Once we were in her car, I broke down. "They've gone too far, Karen. I can't take this anymore. First the lies, now this. What if next time they succeed? What if?" She cut me off firmly. "Listen to me. They're desperate. That's why they're escalating. But we have the advantage. They've crossed into criminal fraud and I can prove it. You just need to hold steady." Hold steady. Easier said than done when the world was collapsing around me. David was waiting at my house when Karen dropped me off. He rushed to me, arms wrapping around me so tight I almost couldn't breathe. "Mary Jane, I was going crazy. Are you okay?" I buried my face in his chest. "They're trying to destroy me, David. And I don't know how much more I can take." He pulled back, his eyes blazing. "Then it's time we stop waiting for them to attack. We take the fight to them." That night, Mark the PI came over with a thick binder. "I've been piecing things together," he said, laying it on the table. "And what I've found isn't just about your siblings. It goes deeper." He opened the binder. Inside were bank statements, screenshots, recordings. Michelle had been funneling money into an offshore account, using shell companies. Daniel had been moving cash through shady casinos, laundering funds. And worst of all, there were transfers tied to my mother. Proof she had accepted payments from Michelle to testify against me. I felt sick. She sold me out for money? Mark's voice was steady. "Not just money. Debt. Your mother was drowning in medical bills and loans she never told you about. Michelle paid them off in exchange for her cooperation. The betrayal burned, but the evidence was gold. If I played it right, I could not only clear my name but expose them all for fraud." Karen's strategy shifted. "We're going to hit them with everything at once. Fraud, bribery, conspiracy. But we can't just do it quietly. They've dragged your name through mud publicly, so we'll restore it publicly. This won't just be a court battle. It'll be a reckoning." The plan was set. But before we could strike, Michelle struck again. One evening I came home to find my front door ajar. Panic surged through me. I stepped inside cautiously, heart hammering. The place was a mess. Drawers yanked open, papers scattered, photo frames smashed. They had broken in. In my office, my filing cabinet was wide open. The folder with Linda's documents was gone. I collapsed onto the floor, tears spilling. They had stolen my strongest evidence. Without it, my case was weaker. David knelt beside me, gripping my shoulders. Listen to me. They don't know everything you have. They think that folder was the key, but you've got Mark's binder, recordings, bank transfers. They've only delayed the inevitable. His words steadied me, but the fear lingered. They were inside my home now. No longer just attacking from a distance. They were crossing every boundary. Karen filed a police report for the break-in, but I knew nothing would come of it. Michelle and Daniel were too careful to leave fingerprints. I doubled down on security. New locks, alarms, cameras inside as well as out. I refused to let them make me feel like a prisoner in my own house. Meanwhile, Mark uncovered something even bigger. A recording of Michelle on the phone with her friend at the clerk's office, discussing how to adjust court documents to make me look worse. Her voice was clear, undeniable. That was the smoking gun. We decided to unveil everything at the next hearing, but Karen had a bigger idea. They've smeared you in the community, Mary Jane. If we only expose them in court, half the town will still believe their lies. But if we reveal this in a public setting, where they can't spin it, there's no coming back for them. The opportunity came sooner than expected. My mother's church was hosting a community fundraiser, and Michelle volunteered to speak on behalf of our family. She planned to present herself as the responsible daughter caring for her unstable sister. The irony was suffocating. Karen leaned forward across her desk. This is it. We go public there. You speak, you present the evidence, and we let the truth detonate in front of everyone they've been lying to. I hesitated. It'll humiliate my mother. It'll tear the family apart. David's voice was gentle but firm. Mary Jane, they already tore it apart. You're just showing the world what they did. So I agreed. The week leading up to the fundraiser was hell. Michelle called repeatedly, leaving voicemails dripping with false sweetness. Mary Jane, please don't fight us. Just let us take care of things. It'll be easier for everyone. Daniel left threatening notes on my car windshield. Back down or regret it. Even my mother came by, tears streaming, begging me to let it go for the family's sake. But I held firm. The night of the fundraiser arrived. The church hall was packed. Neighbors, relatives, community leaders. Michelle stood at the podium, glowing in a lavender dress, speaking about family responsibility and sacrifice. The audience nodded along, eating out of her hand. I sat in the back, my heart pounding, Mark's binder heavy in my lap. When Michelle finished, the pastor asked if anyone else in the family wanted to speak. I stood. The room fell silent as I walked to the podium. My hands trembled, but my voice was steady. I wasn't planning to speak tonight, I began, but since my family has made me the subject of so many rumors, I think it's time I tell the truth. Gasps rippled through the room. I pulled out the binder and held it up. For months, I've been accused of being unstable. My siblings claimed I was unfit to manage property. My own mother testified against me. But what they haven't told you is why. I opened the binder, flipping to the first recording. Mark had set up a speaker system so everyone could hear. Michelle's voice filled the hall, cold and clear. We just need to make sure the documents show she's unstable. Once the judge sees that, we'll get everything. The crowd erupted, shocked murmurs, heads turning toward Michelle. She paled, stammering, "That's out of context." But I wasn't done. I displayed the bank transfers on the projector. Michelle's offshore accounts, Daniel's gambling payments, my mother's debts cleared by Michelle. Each slide landed like a hammer. Finally, I held up the anonymous letters. They tried to scare me into silence. They tried to destroy me. But the truth always finds the light. The room was chaos. People shouting, reporters scribbling, the pastor trying to calm the crowd. Michelle burst into tears. Daniel stormed out. My mother collapsed into a chair. Me. For the first time in months, I felt free. But the night wasn't over. As the room buzzed, a man in the back stood and cleared his throat. It was someone I hadn't expected to see. An old family friend, and he had something that would twist the knife even deeper. The church hall buzzed with chaos. Whispers, gasps, the sound of feet shuffling as people tried to process what they had just heard. Michelle was pale as paper. Daniel had stormed out, and my mother sat trembling, unable to lift her head. Then the man in the back cleared his throat again. His name was Harold, an old family friend who had been close to my father before he died. He was tall, with a presence that commanded attention even in the midst of madness. "I need to speak," he said, stepping forward. The pastor tried to calm the crowd, then reluctantly handed him the microphone. Harold's voice was steady, but his words struck like lightning. "I've kept quiet for too long. But seeing Mary Jane dragged through this humiliation, seeing her accused of things she never did, I can't stay silent anymore." The crowd quieted instantly. Harold turned to Michelle and Daniel. "Your father confided in me before he passed. He told me he was worried about how you two would behave after he was gone. He suspected you'd try to take advantage of Mary Jane's success. And he left me something he asked me to keep safe in case this very moment ever came." He pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. Gasps rippled through the room. "This," Harold said, "is your father's last letter. It wasn't part of the official will because he gave it to me privately. But it lays out his wishes in plain words." He handed it to the pastor, who read it aloud. The letter was simple, heartfelt. "My father wrote about his love for all of us, but he also wrote with brutal honesty. He acknowledged Michelle's recklessness, Daniel's gambling, and his fear that they would squander everything. And then he wrote, 'Mary Jane is the only one I trust to manage what I've built. She is responsible, disciplined, and fair. If anyone tries to take from her what she has earned, know that they are betraying not just her but me.'" The words echoed like thunder in that hall. I couldn't hold back the tears streaming down my face. Michelle let out a strangled cry. "That's fake. You're lying." But Harold shook his head. "Your father signed it in my presence. I've kept it safe all these years." The crowd turned on Michelle and Daniel, murmuring angrily. The perfect facade they had built crumbled in an instant. I thought that would be the end. That public opinion alone would vindicate me. But Michelle wasn't finished. She stood, shaking, her eyes blazing with desperation. "This doesn't prove anything," she shouted. "She's still unstable. She's dangerous." Her voice broke, but she tried to push through. "You're all falling for her act. She's manipulating everyone, just like she manipulated Dad." The room erupted again, but this time, people weren't buying her performance. Too much evidence had been revealed. Too many lies had been exposed. The pastor finally intervened, calling for order. "This matter belongs in court," he said. "Let the law decide." And so it did. The final hearing arrived weeks later. By then, the story had exploded across local news. Family feud over inheritance turns ugly. Daughter declared crazy, fights back with evidence. Cameras lined the courthouse steps. Reporters shouted questions as I walked in with Karen, Mark, and David at my side. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Michelle sat with her lawyer, stone-faced. Daniel avoided my gaze, fiddling with his tie. My mother looked smaller than ever, her eyes red-rimmed, guilt written across her face. The judge entered and the room fell silent. Karen presented our case with precision. She laid out the forged documents, the anonymous letters, the bank transfers, the recordings of Michelle plotting with her friend at the clerk's office. She played the voicemail from Daniel, his drunken threats. She even submitted Harold's letter from my father as supplemental evidence of intent. Then she delivered the knockout punch. Linda's sworn affidavit about the attempted bribery. Though the original folder had been stolen, Linda had bravely recreated her testimony in full detail. By the time Karen finished, the judge's expression was unreadable, but I could see the weight of our evidence pressing down on the courtroom. Michelle's lawyer tried to fight back. He painted me as controlling, accused me of hoarding wealth, and even claimed the recordings were doctored. But it was weak. The evidence was too overwhelming. When Michelle took the stand again, her composure cracked. Karen cross-examined her ruthlessly, forcing her to admit contradictions. At one point Michelle snapped, shouting, "She doesn't deserve it. None of it. It should have been mine." The courtroom gasped. That single outburst destroyed whatever credibility she had left. Daniel fared no better. Under questioning, he contradicted his own testimony and stumbled over dates. When asked about the gambling debts, he went silent, his face burning red. Finally, it was my turn. I stood, heart racing, and spoke from the core of my being. I loved my family. I worked hard for everything I have, and I never wanted a fight. But when the people you love most try to tear you down, you have two choices. Let them destroy you or fight for your truth. I chose to fight. And I will never apologize for protecting myself. The courtroom was silent. The judge recessed for deliberation. The wait was agonizing. David held my hand the entire time, his thumb tracing soothing circles against my skin. When the judge finally returned, the air felt thick enough to choke. He cleared his throat. After reviewing the evidence, it is clear that the petition for guardianship was filed in bad faith, based on fraudulent documents and false testimony. Therefore, the petition is denied in its entirety. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. But the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, due to the severity of the fraudulent activity presented, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for possible criminal charges of perjury, forgery, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The courtroom erupted, gasps, murmurs, the shuffle of reporters scribbling furiously. Michelle's face drained of all color. Daniel slumped in his chair. My mother wept silently, her shoulders shaking. Justice. At long last, justice. Outside the courthouse, cameras swarmed me. Microphones shoved into my face, reporters shouting, "Mary Jane, how do you feel?" I paused, my heart still pounding, and said the only thing that mattered: truth always wins. No matter how long it takes, no matter how hard the fight, truth wins. The weeks that followed were a blur. The DA launched an investigation into Michelle and Daniel. Michelle's friend at the clerk's office was suspended. Daniel faced charges related to fraud and illegal gambling. My mother, she withdrew from everyone. She called me once, sobbing, apologizing, begging for forgiveness. I couldn't find the words to answer. My wounds were too raw. Maybe one day I'd forgive her, but not yet. As for me, I rebuilt. Slowly, piece by piece, I put my life back together. My reputation restored, my properties safe, my spirit scarred but not broken. David never left my side. Through it all, he stood with me, steady as a rock. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset, he took my hand and said, "You fought harder than anyone I've ever known. You didn't just survive. You proved your worth to everyone. I'm proud of you." Tears filled my eyes, but this time they were tears of relief. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe freely. The betrayal had been deep, the wounds permanent. But justice had come. And though my family name was forever stained by their actions, my own name had been cleared. The moral? Sometimes the worst betrayal comes not from strangers, but from those you love most. But betrayal doesn't define you, your fight for truth does. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Let me know your thoughts in the comment and tell me which city you are watching from. Don't forget to like, subscribe to my channel. Your support encourages me to keep writing and sharing my stories with you.